So this webinar is about adding research to your design process. And the reason we put this together, I suppose, is because a lot of the work we do is around advising clients on how they can fit research in. This counts for startups and big organizations as well. If they haven't done research as standard, or research has been a bit piecemeal over the years, they don't necessarily know how to fit it into their design process. They don't know how to spec up research, and they don't necessarily know how to manage it. So this will be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope it will help. And if you have any further questions or anything that you'd like some advice on, do feel free to follow up, like I said. So just to give a bit of information about who we are, we're a small consultancy based in Beeston and Nottingham, and we work with the public sector, established companies and startups. We provide research that informs the design of products and services, from the startup level all the way up to enterprise or big government systems as well. We do interviews, focus groups, surveys, user testing, data analysis, among many other things. And this is just some of our clients. So we've done quite a bit of work with Innovate UK funded startups, for example. We do a lot of work with the NHS, and we're just about to start a new project with them. Accelegress is one of the startup companies that we've worked with. eConsult, I suppose you would say, is a scale up in the healthcare sector. Everyone knows the ESF, the Education Skills Funding Agency, or we might not, DFE agency, and Lego. Everyone knows Lego, and I stick it in there because it's cool. So to talk a bit about what design research is, because not everyone knows what it is. It really is any research that informs the design of a product or service, from reading articles and blogs online to large multi-year projects. And I suppose that initial bit about reading articles and blogs online is the one that often gets forgotten, because research sounds like this big undertaking, but actually, if you just sit down and Google something, you can find a lot just from that. And it's always the first step that we advise companies to do. Google it first, see what's already been done, see what's out there. Research includes methods such as surveys, interviews, focus groups, prototype testing, ethnography, which, if you don't know what that is much more large scale, following people around, looking at them in their natural habitat, so to speak. Observational and longitudinal studies. Observational studies are very good, actually, because you watch people in their environment. It's a really good way to figure out how people actually operate in the real world. And obviously longitudinal studies are ones that go over numbers of years, which tend to be, quite rare, but are very useful. It has its background in psychology. So I suppose it has its foundation in things like human-computer interaction, which is a psychology discipline. And it's all based around how the human mind functions and how people think, feel, and act. And Michael and I, who we run the company together, and we're both psychologists, that's our background. And it's harder than it seems. So I suppose there's been a bit of debate recently about the democratization of research, and anyone can do research. Anyone can sit down and Google things. Anyone can ask a few questions. But I suppose the difficulty with research is knowing which questions to ask some of the time, and then also how to analyze what you get out the other end. That's not always easy, but I will discuss that a bit more as we go along. Good design research goes beyond user research to inform the entire design process from day one. So I suppose this is what the difference is between design research and user research. It can seem like a slightly academic division, but actually what we found when we first started out, we focused very much on user research. The difficulty with just focusing on user research is that it can become very disconnected from everything else. And obviously, there's a lot about the market and the ecosystem and the wider world that informs whether a product or service is going to be effective or not. There's aspects of the company itself and its business model and its operating model that influence whether design is going to work or not. You could develop something, for example, it could be very successful, but actually the company doesn't have the capability to develop it, or it's not technologically or financially feasible for them to develop it. So design research looks at both the detail and the user and the individual needs of people and the bigger picture. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. It combines user needs with the needs of the market and the wider system the product or service sits in, and the needs of the business or organization. So it's much more complex than just what do our users want and need. And the final one there is it's practical and centered around decision making. So that's the thing we always emphasize with the clients that we work with, because sometimes they say, well, how much research should we do? Where should research fit in? Well, research should always be tied to a decision. So why are you doing this piece of research? It's because we want to know X in order to make Y decision. And I'll talk a bit more about that again later. What are the benefits? I mean, the key benefit really is that it de-risks decisions. So if you make a decision, but you're not entirely clear on all the details around it, you're essentially guessing and sometimes just taking a punt. Now, in certain circumstances, that's all you can do, especially in a really open field where you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. But where there is information to be had and where you can find things out, as soon as you find out more information, you're more likely to de-risk that decision and you're more likely to make a better decision. Is usually what we find. It shortens experimentation time. So especially in the tech world, there's this emphasis on move fast and break things. So there's a kind of a, build something and iterate. But the problem with that is that if you don't surround that with research and data gathering, sometimes you just don't know what's working and what's not. It can be a little bit chaotic. Whereas if you build a research structure around it, then the experimentation works a lot better. And this process of putting something out there and figuring out what works actually delivers useful data. And this is what my third point is. It delivers reliable data so results can be tracked. So it just puts a structure on what you're doing and makes sure that you're not scattergunning things. You're not taking unnecessary risks. You're not losing the learning that you could be gathering from the things that you're doing. It flags up potential pitfalls early. And I suppose this is where the Googling bit comes in, because sometimes they say to startups, especially, they'll say, I want to build this product, I want to deliver this service. And I'll say, well, what else is out there? And they will say, well, I don't know, which is fair enough if you're very early, but you need to sit down and Google it, because then you might find that there's a company that does something very similar, or there's a company that has tried it and failed, or, just find out what's out there. That information will help and will hopefully prevent you from making the same mistakes that other people have made before you. It reveals new ideas and potential. And I think this is one very overlooked benefit of research, in that the research can suddenly flag up, if you talk to enough users, actually, there's a really good idea here that we never thought of. And there is one client that we worked with on an Innovate UK project, and they had an idea, which we did some research for with them. We came back and said, the research shows that this market isn't really how you expected it to be, but there is an adjacent idea that is people are crying out for, people are very interested in, that you could potentially deliver. Now, that was quite unexpected for them, because they thought, well, actually, you're coming to us with an idea, but it's the idea that came directly from the users. And so they decided to pivot, which isn't always possible in an Innovate UK funded project, but they did that. And some of the users, some of the people who we had talked to in the research really wanted to be part of it, which is a great result, really, because if you have potential customers interested before anything is actually built, that's great, especially if you're going to look for investment or you're going for further funding in some fashion. The fact that people are interested before you even begin looks great, basically. I'm not able to read my last point because the bar at the end is not disappearing. Could you read it for me, Michael?
Greatly increases the chance of success.
Ah, yes. Okay. It's an obvious one. So, I mean, that's obviously one of the big benefits, is that if you make good decisions, you avoid pitfalls, it flags up ideas, you're going to be much more likely to be successful. And we see that with companies that both in the startup space and in the more developed companies that are larger organizations that we work with, there's a lot less unnecessary risk taking. There's a lot less of decision making that you think, why was that decision taken? And there's a lot more learning and a lot more growth, I would say, in companies that really know how to use research. So what is the role of research in the design process? Well, looking first at what the purpose of design is, and it's worth looking at this because I think this gets a little bit lost sometimes. But basically, the purpose of design is to create something that people will use. And sometimes the startups we work with, especially, they don't always identify who will use the product they're developing or why they will use it. And so if it's not something people will use, it isn't a product and it doesn't have a future. And that sounds very basic, but actually it is quite a difficult one to untangle. Who and why will they use this product or service to solve a problem? So you design something that solves something or makes the situation better for the people involved, to make a process, system, or service smoother or more effective. And this is a lot of the research that we do in government departments. It's about understanding the needs of the people involved and of the agency or the department that's building the system, and how do you match those together to make this service and system more usable, more user-friendly, and work better, basically, and to generally make life better. I mean, many designers would say that is their goal, is to make life better for people, make things easier, make things less frustrating. And research contributes massively to that. And where design goes wrong, and I suppose we've seen a lot of this, and I'm sure anyone who is involved in design on this call also has seen this, a solution in search of a problem. So this happens a lot with startups and sometimes with established companies as well. They create something or they come up with an idea, but they don't actually know how they're fitting that to a problem. And so they're trying to basically, move it around to fit it to a problem, and there isn't necessarily a clear problem that they're solving. Solving the wrong problem happens quite a lot. So there's a problem, but there are problems, there are various things that people want or need, but actually you're focusing on the wrong thing. So you're focusing on the thing that isn't the most vital, it isn't a priority for people, it isn't the thing that people are interested in, it isn't the thing that people will pay for, which is another big one. Solving the right problem in the wrong way. This happens a lot. So there's an issue, there's a problem, and trying to use a piece of technology or a process or a system or a method that isn't suitable for that problem. So it's related to my final point, actually, which is prioritizing tech over people. So there is a tendency to think, well, if it's a techie solution, then that's the best solution. But sometimes a human-based solution is better than a tech solution. And so you end up solving the problem in the wrong way. So, for example, a big one in the NHS is the workforce issue, lack of actual people to deliver the services that need to be delivered. There's a lot of focus on tech to solve that problem, and it can solve a lot of those problems, but some of it is you just need more people. And so it needs to go hand in hand. The two solutions need to go hand in hand to really solve the entire problem. Research and design and how they marry together. I think, again, if people aren't necessarily familiar with it or haven't worked with research a lot, they don't always understand how research and design work together. Ideally, they should work hand in hand. So research informs the design process, design informs the research process. So they shouldn't be two separate activities where the designers are going off and doing their thing and the researchers are going off and doing their thing. The researchers and designers should work together and say, well, this is what we're trying to do. So what research do we need? How does that feed into the design? Here's a prototype, or here's the next stage in the design. Now research needs to tell us more. And actually, government departments are very good at that. So they will really engage in a highly iterative process where they will design a prototype, test it, come back, research it again, iterate it, back and forth between research and design. And it works very, very well. Good research isn't about stacks of data, it's about meaning. And we do see a lot of kind of research around that is just about gathering, 60% of people are satisfied with this product. So what? I mean, what does that tell you? What can you change? What decision does it link to? What does satisfied mean? Who is satisfied? Why are they not satisfied? If you can't link something directly to a design decision, you just have to ask, why are you doing it? What's the purpose? Now, sometimes there can be a business motivation. Sometimes there can be a slight vanity metric issue going on. But really, it is a waste of time to gather data that you're not using directly to inform a decision. And the key is to ask the right question at the right time. I spoke about this a little bit earlier about asking the right questions is often the most difficult part of research, and honing it down and shaping the question. It's similar in a way to design, the iterative process and the narrowing down and the shaving off of things and the simplifying of things. Research is similar. You start with bigger questions and go smaller and tighter and more specific. And that can be quite a process depending on what you're doing. Research questions need to be concrete and relevant. And again, this takes a little bit of experience to get good at. So what we see sometimes when we're working with clients is they ask big and vague questions. Will people use or buy X product? Well, that's what they want to know. But if you go to someone and say, will you use this product? I mean, their answer is going to be worth nothing really, because they could say yes. And what does that mean? They can't necessarily predict their future behavior. They don't know anything about the product necessarily. So that's not a useful piece of data. However, if you know how that product might fit into their lives, or you know that that product fits with the problem they genuinely have, you have a much clearer idea of whether it's going to be successful. So you need to be more specific than just a big vague question. But of course, one of the roles we fulfill is trying to take the big vague questions and bring them down into more concrete questions that can actually be answered. And your aim with research is to build a coherent, evidence-based narrative. So to a certain extent, you're trying to tell a good story. And this works well, I suppose, when you are looking to talk to investors, for example, because they will want to know, why would I invest in this? And if you can tell them a good story, so we know this bunch of users exists, we know they have this issue, we know this issue is of X size, we know that they already pay X amount, but this is not solving their problem. We know they possibly will pay this amount for a better solution, and so on. But all of this has to be backed up with evidence, because a good investor, someone who knows what they're doing, will say, well, how do you know all of that? And that's where research helps you to build that coherent, evidence-based narrative. I just want to talk a bit about design thinking, because this would be something for anyone working in the design world, something you're likely to be familiar with. This isn't a system we use very much. I mean, obviously it has a very wide presence, and it has informed how people approach design. And it has these 5 stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And as a system, as a process, it's quite sensible, it works quite well. But I think where we go beyond this format is we look at the bigger picture, because by the time you get to the empathize part, a lot of thinking and decision-making has already happened. So you're already approaching a certain bunch of users, you're already trying to define a certain problem. And so there needs to be potentially a zoom out process before you go into this process around the actual design of the thing. So you need to look at the problem or the need first. So what problem are you trying to solve, or what need are you trying to fulfill? And as simple as that question is, it isn't always easy to answer. And again, for both established companies and startups, it can be difficult for them to really pinpoint what problem they're solving, or what value they're giving the user. Why would a user be interested in using this? Why would they pay for this? Why is this better than what's already there? And the key question is, how much do you know about that need or problem? So how big is it? Who has the problem? What desire is there to solve the problem or fulfill the need? The final one is one that is quite a key question and gets quite overlooked, because there can be problems out there that are quite serious problems, but no one's interested in solving it. So because there isn't funding for it, there isn't a focus on it, it's not anybody's job, they don't care very much about it. And so there is an element of understanding, do people actually want to solve this problem? It exists, but could anyone be bothered to solve it? Do they actually want a solution? And I suppose this covers a bit more of what our approach is, which again is that zoom out that I was talking about with that design thinking process. So I suppose the design thinking process probably comes more tightly into, we've done some thinking around the bigger picture, And now we're going to start the process of actually building the thing. We work a lot with companies to do this bigger picture thinking around the business, around the market, around the wider ecosystem that this product or service is going to live in. It's especially important for startups because they really need to take a focus away from their fantastic idea and look a bit more widely. But it happens also for big companies and for government organizations because you need to look at the bigger picture, because even if your idea is fantastic, there can be massive barriers that you cannot overcome, or that mean that your great idea is just not going to work for some very good reason. So the key questions we start with are, is there a market or a desire for a solution? So that goes back to that question I was asking earlier, which is, does anyone care about this, and how much do they actually care? Will a solution fit into the current system? And that's very important, especially in areas like healthcare, where it's a very complex, safety conscious system. So we've had issues, for example, or I've spoke to someone a while back and they had developed a piece of kit for surgeons, and it was much better than the existing piece of kit, and it was tested, it was beautifully designed, and then there was no interest in buying it. And when they followed up and said, why aren't you interested in buying it, they said, well, if we buy this new piece of kit, we have to retrain everyone and we don't have time, so sorry, we don't want it. And that's very frustrating, but it's something that you need to know early on. What are the peripheral things that feed into this, and what are the elements of the system that could affect the success of this product? So in healthcare, it can be things like training, safety, infection control, storage. It can also be an issue around whose job is it to do this thing. If you're adding to someone's job, that can be a major issue because that person might not want their job to become bigger or more difficult. And so it's important to understand the bigger picture around where that thing will live. And what are the potential barriers, and are these surmountable? So things like training are surmountable, but you potentially have to provide that training. You potentially have to sell the product and the training together. You potentially have to do a lot of talking and education to let people know that the training is available. And key elements that feed in and out of these questions are the goals of the company or the organization, the wider system, and user needs. So user needs are in there, they're just part of a bigger picture. So one of the key things we do with companies is we sit them down and we go through, what are you trying to achieve? As a company, what do you want to be? Or as an organization, what do you want to do? What will success look like? What do you actually want to achieve? And that's a big thing with startups actually as well, because usually with a startup, there's one or two people involved. And so they need to have an idea of where they want to end up. They don't want to go 5 years down the line having a super successful product and hate every minute of it. So it's worth looking at, what is the goal of the company? What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And what barriers are there? So internal company barriers are what I'm referring to there. So is there a lack of technical capability? Are there financial barriers? What barriers are there that need to be looked at before you get started? And are those barriers, again, are they surmountable, or are they so difficult to overcome that actually it's not worth it? The wider system, and this first question is a really important question, and one that doesn't always get considered. How is this problem currently being solved? So obviously the big thing there is competitors who exist in this market, but homemade solutions are really a source of massive insight into any problem that you're looking to solve. If, for example, you're developing a data management system and you look into what's already happening in the user group that you're interested in, and they have a spreadsheet and they're willing to share that spreadsheet with you, that's a massive amount of information because it shows you exactly what they're doing and what they need. If you can take their messy, unreliable spreadsheet and change it into a reliable product, you have a bunch of customers ready to go. You're giving them what they need. They're giving them exactly what they need as they've specified, and better because it's more reliable or has easier functionality. And it's really a simple way to figure out what you could deliver in that circumstance. And how does the system or market function? This is a really important one. So we've done research in the past, for example, where the people who are developing the product or service believe that the market functions in a particular way. When we actually go out there and talk to people, we realize that the supply chain is different to what they expected, or the procurement process isn't what they thought it was, or the people who hold the purse strings, and this happens a lot actually in healthcare, the people who actually hold the purse strings aren't the people that are going to use the product. And so you need to develop something that pleases the users. And usually in healthcare, you also have to develop something that pleases clinicians, and you have to build something that also pleases the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, or the PCN, all those lovely acronyms, but all the various people who are involved in that ecosystem, who actually pays for the thing and who actually uses it at the end of the day. And user needs. And these are the more well-known questions that people ask when they're doing user research. So who are you solving the problem for? What does their world look like? And what would actually solve the problem for them? And it's that the focus there needs to be on their world, their needs, and who they are, and not trying to impose a solution onto them and say, you should use this because it's great, even though it doesn't really do what you need it to do. So commissioning research, and I suppose we wanted to focus here on commissioning research because this is the bit that can be difficult if you are working in product management, or you're a designer, or you're someone who's building a product yourself. Trying to figure out how to fit research in and how to manage research can be quite difficult if you're not used to it. What we would say is that research works best in a multidisciplinary team where product design, development, and research work together. We see a lot of teams that work quite separately, and the problem there is breakdowns in communication, where designers want one thing, developers don't want to do it necessarily. Research has information, but they can't necessarily share it with everybody. In government departments that work under the Government Digital Service, they are very good at using multidisciplinary teams. And that means that the flow of information between the various elements, developers, designers, researchers, product managers, is really, really good. And it means that there's a coherent direction to the product. And a good researcher should be able to ask the right questions to figure out what the company needs. So it's not necessarily on the product manager or on the product owner or the person who's actually running the business to decide this is the research we need. If there is a researcher who knows what they're doing, they should be able to come in and say, right, tell me where you are with everything. I will figure out what research will work here. So, because that's not always an easy process, especially if research isn't your thing and you're not used to doing it. And as you're speccing out research, so you're putting together a specification, it should have clear goals, but it should not be too prescriptive. That's because obviously as you carry out research, you find things out. And so you might think, oh, we're going to interview 10 people. You interview 2 people and you realize actually we're getting research results that we didn't expect. We need to change our approach. We need to look at maybe a different group of people, or we need to ask different bunches of questions. So it should have clear goals, but not be too rigid in what it's trying to do. So creating a research spec. And this is something we do with companies if they haven't spec'd out research in advance. So sometimes we work with government organizations and they'll have said exactly what they need. Now, often we'll go to them and say, you said you wanted X, Y, and Z, but actually we think you should have A, B, and C. And often they will be fine with that because they know we're coming at it from an area of expertise. With commercial companies or startups, often they know they need research. They don't necessarily know what research. And so we will work with them to map out what they already know and how they know it. So look at how much real evidence do you have? So if they say, we know our users are like this, well, what's the evidence? Does this person really exist? What research have you done with these people, and how much have you actually spoken to them? And how much of it is based on assumption and guesswork? And the answer to that one can be quite a lot, where people think, oh, I know this and I know that. But when you actually interrogate it, you realize, okay, well, you think you know it, or you're assuming it. And that's quite risky because you just don't know whether you're basing your decisions on something you believe to be true or something that is actually true. And it's important then to identify gaps in your information that could threaten your success. And really your focus should be on understanding the problem and the people, not on the solution. So try to focus on who you're trying to work with and what their problem is, rather than saying, well, I have an app, or I have a system, or I have a service, and I need to push this forward into this area. That clouds your judgment. You have to look at who are the people, what do they need, and then the solution that I figured might work, is that actually the right solution, or do I need to change what I'm doing? Step 3 is to set a goal for the research, and you need to try to make it specific. So to understand how X user group solves Y problem, for example, and it could be bigger or smaller than that, but it depends on the scale of the research. But you need to identify the decisions the results will influence. If there are no decisions that the results will influence, then why are you doing it? Then it can be vanity or marketing metrics or something else. But if it's for a design, then you need to link it to something. So to understand how X user group solves Y problem in order to develop features for this user group, or whatever it will be. And choose your methods. And what we'd always say is start with desk research, because why not? Desk research being sitting down, reading articles, Googling, reading blogs, and so on. Interviews provide an in-depth understanding from a small group. They're quite time-consuming, but they give you a lot of rich nuance and information. And surveys provide a surface understanding of a bigger group. People tend to go straight to surveys because they think they're quicker and easier. They're not. That's all I'm going to say about that. We can talk more about surveys if anyone's interested in what the difference is between those methods and why surveys aren't always easy as they seem. So I've put together a completely fictional example, and Jo was very amused this morning when she read this. Top Wolf Dog Food, I'm going to copyright that name so no one steal it, provides a subscription dog food delivery service to discerning dog owners. So they recently started a range of food for elderly and unwell dogs, and believe an app that allows owners to track their pet's health may increase sales and customer loyalty. Now, I'm going to ask a question, and I'd be interested in anyone knows the answer, but Michael might answer if no one jumps in. This is an example potentially of one of the issues that I identified earlier with design, but I'm wondering if anyone can identify it. And the clue is that they believe an app that allows owners to track their pet's health may increase sales and customer loyalty. Throwing it out there if anyone knows what the issue might be. I'll leave it hanging, and do put it in the chat if you think of it, or I'll get Michael to chime in maybe. But the known things that they have, so this is an established company that already has customers, is that Top Wolf customers tend to be relatively wealthy and willing to spend money on their dogs. So these are not your general supermarket shoppers. They're people who are interested in specialists or more expensive food, but they're sometimes hesitant around buying special food. So their special dog food range isn't doing so well. So what is unknown, so again, there'll be lots of unknowns and unknowns, and there would be a lot of detail going on here, but the unknown is what customers currently do to track their dog's health, if anything, and why they're hesitant about buying special food. I can see there's an answer in the chat. What is there? Is that an answer to my question? Michael, you'll have to tell me because I can't read it.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot. Yes, so we've got two. So we've got one saying trying to solve a problem that no one has asked for.
Yeah.
And yes, assuming a solution without understanding if there's a problem.
Exactly. I'm very impressed. So it's a solution in search of a problem. Yeah. So they've already come up with the solution, or they've already jumped to a solution. Now, this happens a lot, and it's not something we can necessarily edit out of the work that we do. So we have to address the fact that if we work with a company like Top Wolf, they've decided we want to do an app. It's not always clear where that decision comes from or why they think an app would be great. And it can be traced back sometimes to a thought process that doesn't always make sense. But that doesn't mean research won't help in this situation. It just means that we potentially need to work with them to help them to keep an open mind and say, well, okay, you think that an app will help. Let's see. Let's not assume. So the research aim in this project would be to understand the needs of customers who have elderly or unwell dogs to determine whether an app will meet those needs. So it's a fairly general approach because clearly they don't know that much about this group. So they probably need to do a bit of a fishing expedition. They've decided this group is a group to focus on. So that's where the research will focus. But it is on a specific group, which is customers who have elderly or unwell dogs. So not your typical dog, but one that has particular need. And to understand whether an app will meet those needs. So I suppose we've kind of snuck it in there in by stealth to say, okay, we're going to assess the decision to create an app. So it's not to figure out the design of the app, it's to figure out if the app will work at all, whether you should do it or not. So, and that's absolutely fine. They think an app will work. It's fine to use research to test whether that's true or not. So key research questions, and there might be quite a lot of them, but these would probably be the main focus. So do customers with elderly or unwell dogs differ from other customers? And that's important to know because are they like the general kind of customer population, just happen to have dogs who are elderly or unwell, or is there something about them? Potentially they tend to be older themselves, or they tend to work in shelters, or they tend to be vets, or who are they, the people who have these dogs that are not as well as others' dogs? What are their experiences around caring for their dogs, and what issues and barriers do they encounter? So what problems do they actually experience, if any? What do they feel would help and support them, and what information would they like to have? So you're trying to figure out what is it that would actually solve. Do they have problems? Are there problems that they experience? And what would help to solve those problems? So desk research is always the place to start because there's bound to be research out there about caring for elderly and unwell dogs, from vets, from veterinary companies, from pet food manufacturers, from any wide range of things. So it's worth just reading everything that there is about it. Interviews with vets would be quite important because they would have a lot of knowledge about people who care for elderly and unwell dogs because they see them all the time. Interviews with target users, so you'd identify people who have elderly and unwell dogs and talk to them. And then a survey, because obviously if you talk to 7 owners, they could be a very specific group, but you would find out in general what those people think and feel and say and experience. And then you'd go out to a wider group via survey and go, well, does this exist in a bigger group of people? Or is this just a niche thing that we've seen in this smaller group? And managing research, and I'll come back to, how you might use the research results based on our Top Wolf research. But managing research it can be a difficult process, especially if you're trying to do it in-house or you're trying to do it yourself, because it can be time consuming. So even just doing things like interviews can take quite a lot of time between recruiting, doing the interviews and analysing them. So it generally needs some dedicated resource or some dedicated time, and accepting that it is going to be pretty time consuming upfront is important so that you don't spend too little time on it, basically. Having a recruitment strategy is important because you need to get people on board, and you can use a recruitment company who will specifically find the people that you want, or you can use your own database if you are allowed to do that GDPR wise, or use social media, which is a very good way of getting people to chat to you, especially if you have incentives, £20 voucher, £50 voucher, depending on how long the time is. You need to review the results early, so you might need to change your approach after your desk research. For example, you do your desk research and realize, oh, there's lots of things we didn't know here, so we need to change our approach. or after one or two interviews, you realize there's things coming out of these interviews that we really didn't expect. And so we want to change what we're doing. So we'll say that TOFCO find that customers are knowledgeable about nutrition, but rely on vets when it comes to health. So they kind of know a lot about their dogs, but actually they look for kind of specialist advice when it comes to their dogs being unwell. They Google a lot, but they don't always trust what they read. So they're a little bit dubious at times about the information they're given. They want vet advice when it comes to special food. They don't want to make the wrong choice. They do track their dog's health, but they find it stressful and difficult. And they want clear, easy to understand information. So the question is, what do they do with this? Now, I would say here, what we would see in this research is some indication that reliability and, you know, someone who has a bit of clout behind them is important. That just general information isn't going to be enough. They want to know a vet is giving them the advice. That's quite valuable because you can say, well, our vets have recommended this, or, you know, that, and a lot of companies do that. And they do track their dog's health, but they find it stressful and difficult. And I'd want to know more about that. What's stressful and difficult? Because that does ping up something. Could you make it less stressful? Could you make it less difficult? And so potentially you want to know more. And potentially with more interviews, you could find that out. What is stressful? What is difficult? And would an app help there? So you need to translate those results into something meaningful. Now I'm going to go through the next bit relatively quickly because I want to give people time to ask questions. But I'm going to talk a bit about some research that we've done. So we worked with an EV startup, and they wanted to develop a solution for people to reserve chargers. So they secured funding through Innovate UK that allowed to develop a solution that allowed electric vehicle owners to reserve chargers. It's a known issue, being able to find a charger that's suitable and available. So we mapped what is known. So we knew that there's a desire to increase electric vehicle use to meet policy goals. Obviously, there's a desire to get rid of petrol and diesel vehicles, and that there's a reluctance for people to change from the ICEVs, so internal combustion engine vehicles. So what is that reluctance? And we identified gaps. So we looked at the detailed policy landscape and what are the changes that are happening and what are the incentives that government is giving and what is the push that government is doing. We looked at the views and challenges of charge point operators because they're the ones who actually manage and monitor electric chargers. And we looked at the barriers to EV uptake. So why aren't people buying electric vehicles? We interviewed EV owners and prospective owners to understand their experiences and their barriers and to identify their needs. We also did a survey of drivers in general. So what are their attitudes towards electric vehicles? What would stop them from using an electric vehicle? If they have one, what solutions are they using? And how big is this market need really? So the research provided them with detailed evidence about the bigger picture, policy, politics, what the push forward was with electric vehicles, and about the particular user needs of drivers and prospective EV drivers. We had to inform their business model by indicating the market demand. So how big is this market? How much is it likely to grow? The potential partners they could have with charge point operators, especially, and the potential for business-to-business solutions. So originally their solution was very much business to customer, but through the research, we identified a potential for business to business as well in the management of charge points on private land. And we had to simplify and sharpen the value proposition, which is really important when you're, especially when you're pitching for money, either for grants or for private equity. I'm not going to spend too long on the healthcare context. I just wanted to bring it up because we've worked quite a lot in that area. But healthcare is particularly complex because of just how complex the systems are and how safety conscious they are. So some research we did, and I wanted to highlight this for research on an established product rather than something that's new. So NHSX, which used to be the kind of digital and transformation arm of the NHS, and I was sucked into NHS England, identified a need for patients to share their data easily. So they prototyped a data sharing solution via QR code that sits within the NHS app. And they wanted to understand how patients and staff would engage with the solution and what they would call it. So we did research with staff and patients. We co-designed a name for the solution, which was a really interesting process because it gives you a lot of insight into how people see that data sharing element and their issues and their difficulties with it. And we analysed the words, phrases, and attitudes that they had to identify what resonated with them. And we prototyped the solution with the names to see how they responded to them. So it was quite a thorough piece of research on quite a specific thing. And we just gave them a lot of insights. Basically, there was a lot of stuff there about how people view data sharing, their concerns, what they would call it, whether they would use it or not, whether they would have difficulties with it, and so on and so forth. So that NHSX were very pleased with that. And I suppose to finish off, it just kind of highlight the hidden benefits of research. So, and this is true whether you do research yourself within your own team or just as part of your own product, is that it opens up conversations. So it adds new information and it allows you to discuss and debate things. So you read an article and you bring it to your team and say, what do you think of this? This is something I didn't realize. Let's talk about it. It uncovers new ideas. I talked a bit about that earlier, about the fact that when you do some research, users can sometimes start saying, it would be great if we could, I would love it if a product would. And then you think, well, why don't you just develop that? Because people are asking for it. So there is potentially a big need for it. It improves team communication. Again, I think that's because it opens up conversations and allows people to explore ideas. Research, and I think this is an overlooked one, informs great marketing, because if you're able to say, we know this about people, and you can match what you're talking about to people's actual thoughts and needs, it resonates way better than just making something up or writing something that you think sounds good, but doesn't necessarily match what your users want or need. And it supports grant applications and pitch decks. So if you have research and you're able to say to a grant officer or to someone you're pitching to get money from, we've done some research and we know for a fact this exists, then that's a much stronger proposition than just saying we think this or we believe that, which sometimes looks flimsy and a little bit dubious depending on the situation.